So in this short video, I'm going to have a look at when you use a particular graphing method and how to decide. So here we have two different equations, which you might be asked to graph in an extension 1 question. So really what we're looking at is what's happening with these two things, and there are two methods we can use. Calculus we can always use to look at turning points and getting the information regarding the graph, or we can use what's called a critical points method. Okay, so let's have a look at the two of them. Just in terms of checklist, what are we looking for to give us some guidance? Well, if the graph is continuous, okay, so there's no break in the graph or there's no vertical asymptote, then certainly we could use calculus to do that. Also, if you're asked about turning points, nature of all these things, again, it's probably worth or necessary actually to use calculus. The information we're interested in is asymptotes, and so if there is a vertical asymptote, so if the denominator of a fraction cannot equal 0, then there's a vertical asymptote, and that's going to give us an indication again about which way is the best way to go. We have to consider maximum and minimum points. Usually, but not always, you'd be looking at the wording of the questions. If it asks for that, if it just asks for a sketch, you may not need that. You always need points of x and y axis intersection. So the critical points method, and I'll do an example in another video, begins by looking at the intercepts of both the x and y axes, considers vertical asymptotes, because most often the critical points method is used best when it's a discontinuous graph. So there will be a vertical axis, a vertical asymptote involved. The horizontal asymptote we find by taking the limit of the equation. Then, and I'll demonstrate again later how to do this, but looking at the regions of the graph to figure out, well, where is the graph positive and negative and what's happening with it, and then sketching it by using that information. Alternatively, of course, we could just use calculus, which sounds easier, but it isn't always necessarily the best alternative. So looking back at the questions we began with, here's a discontinuous graph. X cannot equal -2 and cannot equal 1. So there's asymptotes there, and so thinking about the critical points method is probably the best way to sketch this. Whereas this one here, because we have an x squared, although it's on the denominator, x squared plus 1 is valid for all values of x, so there's no restriction on the domain, in which case we can sketch this, and it's a continuous graph, so we'll use calculus when I demonstrate this example. So just a very quick intro on deciding which way you might go, and I'll provide some examples in further videos.